Hey makeup friends, today I'm going to be sharing with you the 10 palettes I would keep if I could only keep 10. Let's get into this. As always, I want to start off welcoming you back to my channel, or if you are new here, then hello and welcome. My name is Kara, and on my channel we like to mix beauty, brains, and the occasional F-bomb. Now, in terms of the makeup that I'm wearing on my eyes, I have the new palette here from MAC. This is called the Feast Your Eyes palette. And on my lips, also part of that collection from MAC, is the shade, it's something funny, Tarnished Reputation. There it is. So that's what I've got going on here. I did film this look as part of a Get Ready With Me, talking about my 2-year update from gastric bypass surgery. So that is either up or is coming up soon. I'm not sure at this point. But at any rate, let's get into today's video. Now, I have seen a lot of creators here on YouTube doing this. I haven't watched the videos yet because I didn't want to be swayed, but basically the idea is if you could only keep 10 palettes, which 10 would you keep? Now, I'm not necessarily viewing that as my 10 favorite palettes in my collection. What I'm looking at is sort of curating a collection of only 10 palettes using what I already have. So that's the approach that I've taken. And as I sit down to film this, I am sure that once I finish filming it, there's probably going to be a palette where I'm like, would I keep that one though? No, I'd probably switch it out with something else. However, I have gone back and forth several times preparing for this video, and I feel pretty confident with what I've got in front of me. So I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to approach this, but honestly, I think we're just gonna do it randomly. There's really no rhyme or reason to it, but I can say that one palette jumped into my mind immediately, and there was no doubt about that one. So let's start there. And that would be this one here. So this is the Plain Jane palette from Adept Cosmetics. And it is a palette filled with super foiled, super shimmery shadows. And as a palette, it's not one that I typically reach for just on its own. I like to add it into others. But as a collection of shades, I think that this would be a really perfect addition to the collection because you're getting so many super foiled shadows that are very different and unique from a lot of the shimmer shadows that you find in other palettes. So that's my reasoning behind keeping this one. I do have other Adept Cosmetic palettes that I absolutely love, but this one is just the collection of shimmers, so I think that that would add something to this little curated set that we're about to talk about. Now, as I said, I like to use the Plain Jane palette in conjunction with other palettes, so I wanted to include a palette that was all mattes, but I wanted them to be as versatile as possible. And so that is where this palette comes in. This is the Beautopsy palette from Hindash, and this is a really interesting palette in that it's all ombre pans. So although there's only 6 different pans in here, you really do have essentially limitless options here because you can go at any point in that ombre and it's going to change the effect on the eyes. And what I also really like about this palette is that it's very, very buildable. So when you see, for example, this pan here where it's a really true red, it doesn't appear that intense on the eyes when you first apply it, but you can build it up to that. So not only do you have a range within each pan for the different shades, you also have a lot of versatility in terms of the intensity of those shades. And additionally, this palette can also be used for bronzer, highlighter, blush, all of that good stuff. So it is a very, very versatile palette for only having 6 pans. So this is definitely one that I would want to keep. Now, when I first thought about curating down to only 10 palettes, I was thinking like, which ones would I not want to get rid of? And that approach, I think, would have resulted in a very different selection because, for example, I would have included this one here from Melt. This is the Morte palette. It was limited edition. They have said repeatedly that they do not plan to bring it back. It is beautiful, arguably my favorite of the Melt palettes. But I do have a fairly close I'll use the word dupe, but really it's just an alternate. It's not exact. And that would be this guy here from Beauty Bay. This is the Wilderness palette. I recently did 3 looks using this palette. And this is the one that I would keep. When I'm looking at the perspective of building as versatile of a collection as possible using only 10 palettes, I would prefer to keep this one over the Melt one simply because a lot of those same shades are in here, but there's more in the Wilderness palette. So I'm going to set the Melt one aside, and then we'll take a little bit of a closer look at this one. So you still have like the really deep blue, those shimmery kind of mint shades and the reds that you see in the Melt palette, but you also have this row of greens. You've got this mustard in here. There's just more versatility in this palette than what the Melt one offers. So that is the reason why I would keep this one over the other. So then that kind of took me down the rabbit path of having as versatile of a collection as possible while, again, reducing the number of palettes. So the next 2 palettes are possibly the largest in my collection. And in fact, this one most definitely is. So this is the Carnival 3 palette from Be Perfect and Stacey Marie. And it's not a palette that I reach for very often, if I'm being perfectly honest, if only because it just overwhelms the crap out of me with how big it is. But when we're looking at just keeping a certain number of palettes, this is one that I would want to keep because it's so damn big. So you have a huge range of shades to choose from in here. I have mentioned before, I really do wish that they had at least one true yellow in here, but we've got that covered in another palette. But these are the kind of colorful tones that I prefer. I did look at bringing in the Fade into Hue palette from ColourPop, which is a much more traditional rainbow palette, but I don't tend to reach for really light, like more pastel kind of shades. I like a deeper toned, colorful shade, and this one has that in spades. So that is the reason why I want to keep this one. Similarly, we have this palette here from Glamlight. This is their collaboration with Michaela. And again, it's just a large variety of deeper toned, colorful options with some neutral shadows in there as well. This is just one of those palettes that provides so much inspiration to me, and every time I open it and look at it, I see different combinations of colors coming together, but it can also work with all the other palettes that I have in here. So if there's any gaps to be filled between this one and the Carnival 3, I think I've got them covered. And so while this palette just on its own has a ton of options available in it, using it to sort of fill any gaps that may exist within the other palettes, that's where this comes into play. And I think it's just a perfect collection of more unique, colorful shades. But as you may know, I'm also a huge neutral lover. So while I do have the Hindash palette, I did want something else to just round out a collection of neutrals. And so after much hemming and hawing, I decided to keep this one, which is Glam from Natasha Denona. And it's just a mixture of neutrals. I mean, what else can I say about that? These are high performing, beautiful shadows. I've never had any complaints about this palette. And it does range from, very light colored mattes over here to this really deep dark brown. There's a really good mixture of mattes and shimmers in here. So it's just a palette that I absolutely adore even on its own. But then you can mix it in with, say, one of the shimmer shadows from the Adept palette or from any of these other, like you could add some color to it. And I think it's just going to round out this collection of 10 palettes. Now, if you recall, at the beginning I was saying there's probably going to be at least one palette where I'm like, would I really keep that though? This is the one that I suspect I'm going to hem and haw the most about, but I'll explain my reasoning for keeping it in here. So this is the Born to Run palette from Urban Decay. It came out quite some time ago, but what I really like about it is that it's really deep and grungy in terms of its color story. So while there is color in there, you've got your blues and teals over here, oranges and more cranberry tones. While you do have color, they're not as vibrant and bright as they are in the Michaela palette or in the Carnival 3 palette. So again, if we're looking at versatility, this just fills that gap of providing those deeper options if I wanted to go for a more smoky, grungy kind of look. So that's my reasoning for keeping this one in here. Now, taking it to the other end of the spectrum though, I also do really like warm toned shadows and really fiery kind of colors. And so for that, I would keep the Party in Puerto Rico palette from BH Cosmetics. In here, there's a ton of oranges and fuchsias and reds. It's just basically a sunset palette and it's beautiful. What this lacks though is a really deep dark shadow to help create some dimension, but that's where, say, the Born to Run palette or even the Natasha Denona Glam, or there's some nice dark purples in that Carnival 3 palette. That's where I could pair all of those together to really round out and flesh out this palette. But this one does bring that yellow that's missing from the Carnival palette. So again, it's all about just creating as versatile of a collection of shades as possible. So this one fills gaps that are existing amongst the other ones. Now, another palette that I've been sort of hemming and hawing about is the Flower Punk palette from Kaleidos. Not that it's not beautiful, but it only has 9 pans, so it's really not bringing a ton to the table. However, what it does bring is, first of all, a collection of absolutely stunning shades, just taking it as it is. But again, it's filling gaps with its unique shades that are in here, in particular, these ones up here. I cannot have an eyeshadow collection that doesn't involve grungy olive greens. They're so beautiful. And then this shimmer shadow here, like this greenish gold kind of color, it's absolute perfection. So if only for those 4 shades, I want to include this in here. But these ones are also beautiful as well. And so they do pair nicely together and you can create some really interesting color combinations with it. But you can also go a little bit more monochromatic and just sort of bunch them out that way. But again, they're going to mix and match with the other shades in the other palettes. And so I do think that this has a place within a 10 palette collection. And I'm going to keep it in here, even though it's only 9 pans. So that brings us to palette number 10. Now I have to admit, I feel just a little bit cheeky about this one because I haven't actually applied it to my eyes yet, but I'm coming at this from the perspective of the color story that it offers, not so much the performance side of things. I do expect that I am going to get on quite well with this palette, but time will tell. At any rate, it's the new Retro palette from Natasha Denona, and no palette collection of mine would be complete without a plummy pink palette in it. This color story is just made for my eyes. It really brings the green out of them, makes them pop, makes them look so vibrant, and I just love these shades in any event. So I had to include this in these 10. So there we have it, guys. Those are the 10 palettes that I would keep if I could only keep 10. It was a hard decision. It was really hard because, like I said, this isn't necessarily a collection of my 10 absolute favorite palettes. I can't sit here and say that the Born to Run palette is in the top 10 of my palette collection, but I think that everything serves its purpose. Everything adds to the collection side of things, and so I feel good about this curated set here. Am I prepared to narrow all my palettes down to just these 10? Absolutely not. But if I absolutely had to, I feel pretty good about this collection. I would love to hear from you in the comments. What would you keep? If you could only keep 10 palettes, or if you only have a very small collection, if you could only keep 2 or 3, which ones would you keep? I would love to hear from you. So with all of that said, I'm going to wrap the video up here. I'm also going to link some other people's videos that I have seen doing this one. It's not an exhaustive list, but it just gives you a different perspective from different people. And now that I have filmed this, I can go watch them too. So I'm very excited about that to see what other people have chosen. At any rate, that is it for me today. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch, and I will see you in my next one. Until then, just be a decent human being. Bye for now.